When Pat told me last week that he was going to set up at a card show, I wanted all the details. This is one of my favorite all-time topics: collectors becoming card show dealers for the first time. I knew then that we had to talk, and Pat, who is Insta account haver on Instagram, was kind enough to take some time out of his busy schedule to indulge my questions. What follows does not disappoint. This conversation is about way more than how he priced his cards and whether he made some sales, although that, of course, does come up. I'm Dave. This is my sports card podcast. It's called The Shallow End. Thanks for listening. Let's get started. Hi, Pat.
Hey, Dave. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Just everyday life. Trying to live the dream, but everyday life. That's how I'm doing. How are you doing?
About the same.
Yeah.
One day comes after the next.
Indeed. It's the ever-present march of time that we all go through, and we just try and figure it out ourselves and together. But we have cards that allow us to cope. So that's the plus.
And plenty of drama in the cards to keep us busy in between buying things.
You're right. It's the thing that accompanies nice things. It's social dramas and meaning making and all that sort of thing. Those messy processes. So so it's I'm happy to get together with you and talk about some card adventures.
Yeah, it's been too long. So we decided to talk because you messaged me last week and you said, "Hey, I'm setting up at a show." And so my question for you is where and why?
Okay, so I'll start with the where. So I'm in Canada, in Vancouver to be precise. And geographically, when you are in like the Northeast or in the central part of the United States, or even around Toronto, there's a decent amount of shows, and there's a great deal of a steady procession of card shows and people around, and people kind of go here, and there's regular dealers and things like that. I'm kind of a little bit on the hinterlands a little bit. There's a lot of stuff in Washington, but there's a small little card scene in Canada, which is a little bit strange because, Canada culturally is different. And the reason why I set up is I've taken a little bit of a shift in my collecting. We talked about lanes last time I was on, and I've adopted a new lane. I've basically really gotten into, and I know it's a little bit of a loaded term to call them oddballs, but I've gotten heavily into more esoteric vintage issues in baseball and football, and in particularly food issues. So hot dogs and potato chips and all cards with really bad cholesterol. That's what I've really gotten into, like cards with heart disease. That's what I've gotten into. And as a result, I've had to decide, like, okay, if I want to get these cards, I need to have the funds, to buy these cards. And also I take a particular approach with my collecting where I like to keep things constrained to a particular case, right? I have my case. It provides those parameters with the number of cards that I can have. And, unfortunately to a degree, the size of the cards, but I'm trying to figure that out because a lot of the really cool hot dog cards are a little bit bigger. But I decided to sell some of my stuff. And when I was talking to a buddy of mine, his name's Peter, I was like, "Hey, are you going to this show?" Which is I guess it's like a regional, maybe, or a smaller regional type show. It's held in a college, a small college's. I think it's their basketball arena, but it's also their ice rink, because it's Canada. It's all everything's ice,
Sure.
Everything's hockey. And he said, "Hey, if you wanted to have me host some cards, bring them over and I'll host them." And I said, "Well, I'll do you one better. I'll come and be your helper. And if you let me just put some cards in there, I'll man the table when you're away and provide you some company. And it's one of those things that because I'm not around a lot of shows or the show circuit, it provides a very sort of different view of what the hobby's all about, being on the other side of the table. And I just want to provide the caveat ahead of time. I'm the things that were I noticed that were interesting might not be novel to some of your listeners, or might not be earth shattering. And it might be like one of those things where, I don't know, where a parent or a professor discovers something that everybody already knows about. Like they're like professors that are like, hey, there are these things that exist called memes. And everybody's like, yeah, they exist. They've existed for a while. Everybody knows about them. But do you know about these things? They're amazing. They're and so I don't want to. I just want to provide that warning ahead of time that I might be going into a direction that people might already be aware of. But I think because the hobbies become so extremely online, I think that it provided a sense of perspective that I found to be very interesting and very in some ways contrary to some of the dramas that we had talked about before.
Sure. I want to get to some of those details that you noticed, and I'm really curious to get to those. But just to finish, coming up to the moment, how much time did you have between finding out that you would be doing it and then the show actually happens?
One solid day.
One day.
Yeah, but I already had cards that I like to do the. It's one of those things that in my discussions with a buddy of mine, 1956 Topps guy, an alumnus of your show, he likes to do this thing where he would set up 36 of his favorite cards in his collection. And I do that regularly. And I think that exercise provides a great deal of perspective as to, okay, these are cards that are core to what my collection is all about. And there might be ones that shift in and out, and there might be ones that might be a little bit on the periphery, but there might be ones that might not be in that grouping. And they might be cards that you can get later along down the line. These are not cards that, they magically, if you part with it, it's going to be positively fleeting and you'll never see it again. So I kind of had a mental register of cards that I think would be ones that you'd want to part with. And I think that anybody that goes through any sort of selling or consolidation, I know that you've gone through those processes with cards, that you notice that there's certain ones that it's like, all right, these are ones that are the first wave, the second wave. And so I decided to bring in some 1956s of good players that are slabbed. I brought in some 90s cards. I had a nice little group of 20 to 25. I didn't want to monopolize this guy's Peter's showcase. So I decided to go in there and have the set of cards, and I priced them out and decided to be fair with it and find something that would be friendly for folks to check out, or at least in my mind. That's the big thing. At least in my mind, it made sense.
So the question that I think North America wants to know here is, did you put the prices on the front, on the back, or nowhere?
Okay, so this is the fascinating thing. The guy that I was with does not put prices on. He does spot comp. I put prices on the front. But I think one of the things is that this isn't something that I think with his approach, I think it actually fits with his approach, having no prices on there. And I'll get into it a little bit. He actually is one of those folks that still has the Beckett. Right? He still has the vintage Beckett guide, and it was actually very helpful for him given what his stock and trade is. So Peter's stock and trade is a lot of older hockey, and a lot of vintage. He basically has the 5 rows with vintage Topps and vintage OPC, and OPC for baseball is something that is very much sought after in Canada. It's almost understood as being almost national heritage. For those of you that OPC is like subtly different with a lot of the sets. They're printed in smaller numbers. They have very pronounced rough cuts. I think that the person that was responsible for cutting a lot of these cards was A, drunk, and B, using a butter knife. So there's a lot of off-centered cards, but there are some sets that are within the catalog of baseball OPG that are fantastic, like 1971, for example, where you have the sweet spot of the rarity, because some, especially the higher numbers, were printed at 5 to 10% of what the US analog is. And they also had different backgrounds, where as opposed to the Army surplus green on the 71 tops, it was, I would say, it's somewhere between goldenrod and Nickelodeon orange, and they're beautiful. And the ones that are in the lower numbers have a different setup, and they're, you know, they have English and they have French. They're just the most beautiful set. I think that they're the most beautiful set after the 1950s and that 1960s, 1970s, and even 1980s window. And that's what he basically sells, is he has just all of these raw singles that you know, draw a lot of attention. And when it comes to pricing out the things that are slabbed, there is a lot of trust that's in place with the people that are coming up to his table, because he has a lot of regulars and he'll have in his mind how much they're worth, and they trust him. They take him at his word because he's driven so much goodwill and cultivated so much goodwill, as opposed to me, who's this youngin that comes in, this new guy that's like, you know, maybe I'll have to draw people in with these fantastic prices. So, and this amazing transparency, because I'm an unknown quantity.
And so it was a 1 day show. About how many tables at the show? Ish.
Well, it's a 3-day show. I showed up
gosh.
for Saturday
Okay.
because I have you know, basically I tagged out of parenting. And then Sunday was the hot tag. So I basically my wife basically played Ricky Morton that weekend, and I played Robert Gibson, for those of you that are 80s
The
wrestling
Rockers.
fans.
No, I'm sorry, the Rock and Roll Express.
The Rock and Roll Express, the originals. So I there were about, at least it was said there was about 400 vendors. And it was a 3-day show. I showed up in the middle of it. And just to give y'all a sense of how it was set up, we were facing the door, and a lot of the stuff that was behind us was all the ultra modern stuff, the booths that had the big signs that said buying station, and the big signs that say we buy up to 90% comps, and all that ballyhoo was out of my periphery. It was behind. If I had eyes in the back of my head, I would know what was happening behind me, but I was looking straight forward, and I was at basically a row of vintage tables, more or less. And in front of me were kind of a hodgepodge of vintage and some modern and some Pokemon. And then after that were kind of the folks that were the legacy dealers and a representative from a major auction house. So these are all the characters that are involved in this little drama.
Great. So good. We're just trying to set the scene so that people have an idea of, you know, was this like a 20 table show, which was just about half hour up the road for me once a month, which I don't recommend, versus, you know, the National, which is, you know, the size of Northern Illinois.
Yeah, so, I would have an aneurysm if I showed up at the National. I wouldn't know how to handle any of it. So,
all right. So it's about 400-ish tables. You prepared, you had the prices on the front. You get there, you set up. What happens next? What's it like?
Okay, so what we have here is a hobby world inverted. It's almost akin to what we classically understand the hobby as, because of the fact that we, in kind of the world of Instagram, and you know, I've heard people say the Instagram hobby is not the real hobby, or it's different than quote unquote the real hobby. And I think that the stuff that people talk about with shill bidding and transparency and grading and all these sorts of things like that, all the various debates and dialogues and issues that have emerged are consequential. But when I was at that show, what the group of individuals that came up to the table largely were older men, right? They were retired men that had their lists of their checklists. They were set completionists, and they ran the full gamut of, there was, guys that were going through looking to complete their 1963 sets, their 1963 top sets. There were a couple of guys that were buying cards that they thought were very interesting. There was one guy that showed up, and we hear these stories about people that have these incredible collections that are not on Instagram, don't have a trace, that collect almost outside of the gaze of others. There was one guy that came in, his name was Rick, and Rick came up and he saw that I'd actually put a couple of Venezuelan cards on there, and I love me some Venezuelan cards. They're kind of one of the bases of my collection. And he said, "Oh, 1967 Venezuelan." And as I talked to him, he had revealed that he had the whole set already of 67 and of 68 and of 64. He had them all, more or less. And he had his checklist, and there were very particular things he was looking for. And for some reason, like, almost Peter was like Felix the Cat with his bag of tricks. He said Peter had a 1960, gosh, I'm going to get the year wrong. I think it's 1969 O-Pee-Chee Deckled Edge, Roberto Clemente. And Peter kind of flippantly said, "Oh, do you have this?" And he says, "Yeah, I do, but the card that I'm missing," and he goes through his iPad, he's like, the Willie Mays. And Peter, lo and behold, digs through his box, and pulls out a 1969 O-Pee-Chee Deckled Edge Willie Mays with a pinhole. So this is something that probably, if Mookie Chilson is listening to this, he's probably just like losing his mind. And he produced it, and Rick kind of looked at it, and he was just like, "Okay, this completes the set." And that was something that you have these individuals that are just like, they collect with themselves and to the audience of themselves or the folks that they know. But a lot of those men that came up, they were kind of almost a hobby group where they would meet up together and have trade nights, and they go to shows together. And I think that's one of those things that, when a lot of us collect through some sort of mediation of social media, right? Or collect through, it's like, I can't drive over to where you live, Dave, and go to a show with you. A lot of us don't collect or don't do the hobby around each other on a regular basis. We meet up with each other at big shows, National, Strongsville, Dallas Card Show, the list goes on and on, of these kind of event type shows, these temporary gatherings. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this was that what you had was the strong social aspect of it, that probably people that are in the Northeast or in the Midwest, where it's a little more concentrated, experience this a lot more. But I think that one of the things that really struck me was most of the people that came up, and we were not drawing a ton of people, right? It was a busy show, but we were not drawing the lion's share of people. But the folks that were there, they hung around the table a lot. They talked about the trade nights that they have with each other. They talk about completing sets. One guy was there, and he was looking through a box to find interesting named players. He was looking for superstars and interesting named players through a 1978 box of Topps football. Yeah, and it was one of those things that I just found to be really fascinating about the process of sitting back there, where when you walk around the show, you kind of are in your own world, or you bump into somebody and you talk about things and what'd you get? But when I was sitting there kind of watching the world go by, almost like the merchant through the shop window, one of the things that I found to be really interesting was at a very strong level, there was the aspect of people that are just collecting to complete sets or to complete projects and sharing that with their friends that are right there co-present with them, but also the idea that when you get things, when you get these collections, when you buy things, when you transact, the relationships are really part of the process, and not just like I build this relationship to get this thing. It's very much the relationships that you build with each other. And there's a really, like, one of my academic heroes is a professor at MIT in the business school named Kat Turco, and she has this fantastic book on Harvard Square and how people talk about, the neighborhood isn't what it used to be as it goes through these cycles of gentrification and commerce that comes in. And the thesis that she had about markets is that the value that we derive about our transactions and our market activities is not simply the transaction of I give money for this good in an exchange. It's very much about this idea of building yourself and these relationships that you have with people where you walk up to the counter and say, give me the usual, and the usual comes to you. And I think what I saw was amongst the folks there as people were buying 1971 OP-Cheese from Peter and completing their sets, or talking about going to these other dealers that are there and talking amongst themselves. The relationships were the key aspect of it. And I think that was something that when we are in a space of a hobby or even a social world that's very atomized around what's happening online, or it's kind of extremely online, or where we're distant from each other, or our relationships are kind of a little bit weird because, I've never met you in person, Dave, right? I don't know how tall you are. You've never met me. I could very well be a centaur, right? You don't know. But I think that one of the things about it is that these relationships being very clear and central to it. That was something that was really remarkable about sitting there and watching the world go by.
So let me ask a question that maybe it won't be super easy to answer, but what was your reaction to seeing this? Because you have a solid online presence like a lot of us do when you're on Instagram.
A whopping 417 followers, dude. I am like,
hey, John Lanier says it's about how the depth, not the width, right?
Tie strengths are strong,
right? So what was your reaction though to as you were seeing this and as you were noticing the things you just explained and that you just described to us? What was your own reaction to seeing this?
I was jealous. I was like, man, that would be so cool to have a group of folks to hang around with and just do these little card things or show off cards to each other, where we could just sit there and talk about cards like we're a bunch of 9-year-olds. I mean, that was like the cool thing when we were kids, when you collected cards, where you would come in and you would show your binder and you might trade, or you might talk about these particular cards and kind of ooh and ah. And yeah, I think that there was a sense of jealousy there, but that wasn't everybody that passed by. I mean, there were the regular, I was actually shocked because there was nobody that walked up and slapped the Zion case on the table or on the case that was like, hey, are you buying such and such? Or, hey, did you know that, Danny Dimes is killing it? I mean, that might've been happening behind me. That probably was happening behind me, but there was, people that came up that were inquiring about, Blue Jays players. Do you have any Blue Jays players? There was a woman who was kind of I would say younger grandmother age that walked up and she said, do you have any Trey Savage, or do you have any Addison Barger? And Peter said, no, I have this Dalton Varsho, but it's autographed, but it's unlicensed. And she didn't care. She gave him her $5 and walked away, and maybe it was for her collection, maybe she was giving it to her grandkid or kid. There was some guy that walked by that was asking if we had Jackson Dart or where we could find Jackson Dart cards. People that I guess are just trying to figure stuff out, or he was just desperate and he's like, I need Jackson Dart. But yeah, it was a bit It was a bit normal. I didn't sell very much. I sold a few things, right? I walked away. Hypothetically, if I had paid for the table, I would have walked away to pay. I would have paid for the table, but I would have not made a hearty profit. I'll tell you that. But I think that one of the things that was really interesting is that I did make an acquisition. That might actually get to some of the feelings that came about. So I had a couple of cards. One of them was one of those 1956s that I kind of was like, hey, it's cool, but I can get it elsewhere. And I had another Ken Griffey Jr. card that had been gaining a lot of traction and had been selling for more than it previously had. It was the Pinnacle Museum Collection 1995, the one where he's blowing the bubble gum and it looks like Venus is coming out of his mouth. But I was like, you know what? Somebody come by. I was like, hey, has anybody got any other vintage? And they said, yeah, these guys with the big "we're buying" sign have some vintage cards in the case. And I decided to go over there. I was like, maybe I'll see what's there. And I saw a card. I saw two cards that I was interested in. And I brought these a set of cards there, and it was a guy who had his face in his phone. And I said, hey, are you interested in any of these? And he kind of was like, I'm interested in these two, but I'm not interested in these others because I go for goats only.
Well, okay. La-ti-da.
Yeah. Right. I'm like, you understand the significance of this card right here? It's a Hall of Fame rookie. No, he was not having it. And he priced them out based on comps. I don't know what service he was using. Hopefully Card Ladder. You're wearing the Card Ladder hoodie. So shouts out Hoj and Josh and Christina. Keep up the good work. But he said, okay, I'll give you this, but for this card, you have to give me a bunch of extra money and stuff like that. And it was unreasonable. In my mind, I knew it was unreasonable. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And he had this other card that was there. And I said, how about this? And he's like, yeah, we'll just do it straight up. So I'm sorry for the audio listeners. So let's just unlock the theater of the mind right now. I ended up with this right here. There's tons of glare. I apologize, but it is the 1935 Edwards Ringer and Big Sports of the World, Sports and Games in Many Lands, USA Baseball 25, which is a picture of Babe Ruth. And it's the same design as the 1929 Churchman, but it was printed, and I come to find out it was printed in 3 iterations. Churchman in 29, British American Tobacco in 30, and Edwards Ringer and Big in 1935. So it's technically playing days. And Edwards Ringer and Big and British American Tobacco were less printed, right?
Hold up once more. I'll probably slap this on YouTube, so hold it up one more time.
Yeah. Here we go.
What a great card.
It is, yeah. And the guy just was like, yeah, whatever, take it. And I brought it back to the table, and I just was like, hey, I got this. And I know that there are much bigger time Ruth cards. There's the Goudies and the various strip cards and the various confectionery issues and things like that. But this is my first Ruth card, and I've been looking at it. I've been considering this or the Shonen Club Japanese postcard, because this is for when major leaguers came to play in Japan. But it was this Japanese issue that's fantastic, and it labels it as Babe Ruth, and that's why people are like, oh, it's Babe Ruth. But I brought it back, and everybody at my table, and so Peter and the guys are around the table and a couple other tables over, were like so excited. You had this thing where it was like, oh my gosh, this happened. And I told them the story, and they were like, good, you got him. And maybe, monetary value wise, it was an even trade or was lopsided, but it was one of those things where the social component of it like that co-presence was there, that it made it that much more fun and much, much more enjoyable, versus, you get it, comes in the mail, you open it up and you're like, oh, mail day, and you post it, you do your ritual of, scanning it and then putting it on Instagram and seeing if the algorithm is friendly to you so you could get lots of likes. It was really cool to be able to get that. That was the big get of the show.
There's a coffee shop near my house, and once in a great while I'll go there and do some work or do some grading or just to hang out. But there's always the same group of men who are there in the mornings, and they make it impossible to walk through because they put tables together and they put the chairs all around the table so you can't even get back to your own table, but they seem to be having like the best time.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking of when you were describing what the scene was like there, where it's just like the same people, they know each other, they're hanging out. Mm-hmm. They just kind of want the best for each other. What's going on with your life? How are you doing? Giving each other a little, good-natured ribbing, that kind of a thing. Is that sort of how it felt? Just like a club?
It did. Yeah. I mean, it just felt like amongst all of them, it was one of the, and I don't want to like be like, oh, sports cards are a microcosm to the broader world. But one of the books that I remember reading prior to going into graduate schools was Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam.
Yep.
And the thesis, so basically for those of you that haven't read it, the idea is that what we've experienced in the United States from, he's kind of looking at it through rose-colored glasses, because I think it was published in 2000, and he's looking back to the 1950s, 1960s. But, as it's kind of progressed, it's become a little bit more salient, where that people do not join kind of clubs or civic groups, right? Where you don't have as many people that are members of a bowling team, or many people that are part of, Knights of Columbus or the Elks or this auxiliary group or something like that.
Going to church less, that sort of stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Where there's still a high amount of religiosity, right? But there isn't church attendance, for example. And what that finds is that people are becoming, he uses, he says that people are losing social capital, right? There's many ways of defining social capital, but people are losing those communities and those ties that bind, right? People to each other. And because of that, that has adverse effects on our understanding of the world and our understanding, he kind of has this idea of it almost unraveling democracy in a way. And I think that one of the things that when I was seeing this was, you contrast the two things, where you have, the hobby that's highly online, right? That has its place. It's important for I don't want to be like, oh, hobby positive, let's go back to this nostalgia of people hanging out. But I think that like one of the things is that the online hobby is one view of collecting, and it's one aspect of collecting. But there's the other one that is very much socially embedded in real, tangible connections to other people, where it's, what the person looks like, about them retiring, or about these other aspects, and cards is almost the conduit that binds the people together. But in a way, you could, it could very well be a group of people that are metal detectorists, or people that are really into model trains, or really that into quilting or something like that. But I think that the cards provide a specific form of connection because it's connected to their youth, and it's connected to sports, and it's connected to all these different things, the aesthetics or the completionist aspect of it, finishing a set or whatnot. But I think that it is that sort of sense where it provides a different view of the hobby. Now, I think one of the things that was really fascinating, though, on the other hand, was there were certain things that, so there was a representative from one of the major auction houses there, and nice guy, really nice guy. He came up to the table, and I was like, hey, how you doing? How's the show going for you? And he said, terrible. Because people weren't coming in to submit cards to this auction house. And there was all the action in the back of people opening up and selling their cards for 80-90%. And I don't know if those are cards that would be fitting for those auctions, right? Maybe there were a few. But there was I talked to him and he's like, it's kind of been a bit of a bore. And I was talking to Peter afterwards, and he had remarked that he said, yeah, some of the guys that were at the show had these cards that they wanted to sell or to move, and they didn't know how. And he's like, well, the auction guy is right there. Like the guy from this auction house is right there. It's a top auction house. It's very reputable. It's very good for someone to sell cards on that. And it provides that sort of sense where, just based on some of the dialogues and some of the things that people were talking about, there were things that were absent from their knowledge that might have been in their interest to pursue it. I mean, the guy was there looking through and he's like, oh my God, these cards in these, not mine, but like some of the cards in the, because mine were very middle of the road. But some of the cards in the displays, he was just like, my goodness, these are awesome. These are really cool. And I think that one of the things is that when folks are kind of embedded in that one view approach to the hobby, it's like, well, you're missing out on things that might make, the aspects of the hobby for you better. So, I mean, there was a degree of tunnel vision there. So the clubbiness kind of created a sense of maybe them getting a tunnel vision as to what the hobby can do or what they can do within the hobby.
Yeah. So you mentioned you sold a few things, not a lot, but you sold some. But I imagine over the course of that Saturday, people were coming up and just sort of chatting with you. What were the conversations like? What were their, everyone's different. I know that, but did you notice any sort of a pattern in how they would instigate conversation or try not to instigate conversation? And what kind of little cues did you pick up on?
So I'm horrible at this, but there was a lot of people that were just looking, and then you say, hey, how's the show going? How are you doing? Hi. And people would kind of scurry away. Where I don't know if it's like, hey, I've been spotted. I don't want anybody to know I collect cards.
The madman tried to talk to me.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, when you got glasses like this and a mustache, some people might get the wrong idea. I don't know. But there's I think that a lot of the people, look, there were some people that came up and said, what's the lowest you can do on this? Which is like the weirdest form of negotiating ever.
$4 million.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I am going to reveal my reservation point to you. It's just like kind of like the antithetical to negotiation period. Because obviously I'm not going to say what we could arrive at. But just because there were so many regulars, it was people that came up with the lists, and they would ask where, for example, Peter would get so many O-Pee-Chee cards, or people would walk up and form conversations in front of the table, which would go around to the people at the table, and then I would get roped in because it's like, oh, there's this weird guy here that we don't know. But it was very much like, I don't know, you kind of get this sort of sense of when people talk about shows, and there's some people that just kind of broadly like just shows, whether they're big or small, creatures of all sizes. But you kind of understand the hobby through the big shows, and hey, this particular dealer is here who's a regular, and they have great inventory, and I'm going in there and I want to get this particular slabbed card or this particular rare card for my collection. And with this, it was not necessarily that, because of the size. I don't know if it was the dynamic or the size or the heterogeneity, where it's not like a Strongsville or Philadelphia show where it leans to one direction of this particular niche. So
I guess it's a two-part question. Would you set up at a show again? If not, why not? If yes, what kind of teachings might you apply to the next time around?
I'm I don't have the stamina to, to set up at a show. I would love to just sit behind and watch and do my own little my own little ethnography and watch what's happening. I think that, and there's also the thing where it's like, well, why don't people want to buy my cars? Aren't they good enough? Yeah. But I think that one of the things is that locally I don't have what people desire, right? I don't have what people want, and I don't really want to go out and hunt for that sort of stuff and buy collections and buy a storage locker and wade through it. I'm lazy. But I just would like to, help and watch and mind the table while, people are away or something like that. Because I just thought that the people watching and the observing, and the mild participant observation was really cool. But I think that I would say, if anything, if anybody wants to set up at a show, it's like, just get a sense of knowing your audience, I guess, knowing what people want. I think that, you have, particular dealers that we know and are like, the people, if you want to get the card, they are the people, but they might not work at every show, right? They might not fit at every show. So I think it's kind of a sense of knowing what people want. And being aware that a lot of this stuff is based around the regular, oh, my guy's there, I'm going to go and I'm going to get these particular things. I'm going to chat up and, I'm going to ask them about their spouse or their kids or what have you. But I think that one of the things about it is that I would not set up again, but I think that when I go to shows, I'd probably be more mindful of just taking it slower. I think that that's kind of the thing where it's like, if you don't want to set up, it's like, taking it slow and watching and talking to dealers and stuff like that, and kind of getting a sense of, because I think that it's not even like a thing of like, hey, I'll talk to this dealer and maybe later down the line, they're going to hook me up with this card that they might find. That's part of it. But I think that another part of it is just talking about cards, because I think a lot of us have these cards and we collect these cards, and if we are talking to other people, they we were afraid they're going to roll their eyes, or you're afraid that they're going to be like, oh gosh, what a because it's not the coolest thing to collect cards to some people. But I think one of the things about it is just creating that sort of basis of talking to people and finding friends and finding people that you can link up with and just kind of nerd out and have that opportunity to nerd out in front of a real person that's right in front of you.
So you got to spend a few hours looking behind the curtain, seeing how the other side operates.
Oh yeah, the backstage view.
Right, and then you go back to the online community. Did you feel any different? Just figuring out, here I am. I've seen things now. How do I go back?
Well, it's not like I went on a vision quest. It's not like I squeegeed my third eye and went to the 13th level of the 13th building and ate the beetle nut or something like that, the cosmic cookie. But there is this sort of thing where I actually, it's not even a thing of looking at it and looking through the Instagram stuff, and it's just a different scale of a different scale of looking at things. It's a different game, I guess, like in a very Wittgensteinian way. It's a different language game. But I think that it allowed me to look at my cards differently, where you can think about it and say like, hey, these are these sets of cards that are really cool. And I remember talking to Rick about Venezuelan cards and food issues, or talking to one of the fellows that came up and talking about various players that he was picking out, and talking to him about, oh yeah, I have this card in a Mexican release, and it's all in Spanish, and talking about those sorts of things where you can, that the collection that you have has certain discussion points, or could tell certain cards could tell certain stories, and you could connect it to somebody else's thing that they're looking at, and they could share their stories of what they had. That's like, yeah, I'm really into 63 Tops, because by golly, that was the first set of cards that I ever collected, the first cards I ever ripped. So I think it's I saw it as like kind of a thing where it's, I looked at my collection and be like, hey, there's actually stories that could be told with it, or there's means of talking to people through the cards that I have. So it allowed me to kind of see it in a different way. Now I'm not going to walk around with my Zion case everywhere and be, unleashing cards and be like, let me tell you a story. And, people thinking, oh, I thought there was a camera or a tattoo machine in there, but you have cards. But I think that it's one of those things where it provides a different view of the hobby that exists, but gets a little bit obscured.
Pat, thank you. This has been just really interesting to me. I
don't know. What do you think, Dave? Enough about me. What do you think? I mean, do you have any sort of sense of this? Is this like this isn't probably a novel revelation, but I just wanted to see, like, what do you think?
Well, no, I think it kind of is. I've never set up at a show. I've thought about it. Sometimes as I buy certain cards, and sometimes as I, fill out my binder and see how they're all tied together, I think, how would this look in a showcase? What would people think about it? Where would I have to go? And clearly I'd have to go to somewhere like St. Louis, right? Because so many of my cards are St. Louis Cardinals type stuff. What you're saying, first of all, before you brought up Robert Putnam, about 10 minutes before that, I was thinking, this sounds like Robert Putnam.
Oh, good. Nice.
Yes. And then you went there. This idea of, or Sherry Turkles, Alone Together, right?
Sure.
This idea that we're all
For those of you that don't know, that's the book about Second Life. There was a thing called Second Life back in the day.
Yeah. I think it was kind of like The Sims, but not quite.
Yeah.
Right. And so this idea that we're all doing this, but none of us are really in the same space. And I'm talking about the social aspect of it. So we do the best that we can. Yeah. And I think it's actually pretty good. I do enjoy, the people that I'm meeting and that I've had a chance to meet and get to know and would call friend now. I really enjoy it, but there is really no substitute in my head anyway for just those one-on-one interactions, or, group of 7 people interaction, but just, being able to see them and shake hands and know them, over the course of time, to know what their tendencies are, to know what they like, to know what they're looking for. And hopefully you can find it for them, that kind of a thing. And then you cheer them on. I don't want to say that the online part of the hobby is lacking in that. I don't think that's true at all. I'm sure it's probably really bountiful in some ways, but it does also make me a little bit nostalgic for times that didn't exist. It's probably a bit of a simulacrum, right? Probably for times where, it's like, oh, well, when I was a kid, that kind of stuff. But I do miss in-person stuff. And that is, I get really envious when I listen to people who are in the Northeast, like you said. And it's like, well, I had a hard time this weekend because I had to find, way to get to 3 different shows. I'm like, really? I could drive 5 hours in any direction sometimes and hit no shows for a month. But yeah, there's just a different energy. Even the shows that aren't good, right? Even the shows that aren't very good, there's an energy that is not existing online.
Yeah, there's what it made me think of was, and maybe I mentioned this before in a previous time we've spent time together, was so there's this theory in sociology and to some degree economics, behavioral economics, called network externalities, right? And what they're trying to explain is why things have an outsized popularity, right? Certain things have an outsized popularity amongst groups of people. And the theory is that the things that we watch, or the things that we read, or the things that we collect or do activities wise, become more valuable because we interact with people in a network about them, right? The economists do it backwards, where it's like, oh yeah, we do it like kind of mindfully, and the I always get confused on the causal direction, but it's the one that's the less human, right? Because it's economics, right? But there's this sort of sense that, we, like, hypothetically, right? You join an office of people, right? And you're new to the workplace, and everybody there watches football, right? Or everybody there watches the Real Housewives of insert city, and you watch that show, and it allows you to build richer relationships with other people, right? The other way you can look at it is that because you have those relationships with people, it makes watching the Real Housewives of insert city more fun for you, right? Because you can go and talk to people about it, right? Or with football, you can go and you can talk to people around the water cooler about how the Jacksonville Jaguars blew an incredible lead against the Texans and how it's humiliating. And people say, why are you a Jaguars fan? I've never met a Jaguars fan before. And you say, I don't know. I've taken this lot in life. But there's this sort of thing with network externalities where there's a way in which it's put where it's like the least valuable invention ever was the first telephone, right? Because it's useless. The only way in which the first telephone is useful is if you get the second telephone, and it becomes more valuable as more people get telephones, right? So I think with collecting cards, it's like when you're co-present with people, it enriches the value of the relationships you have, because you have these cards and you can talk about cardboard rectangles, but it also enriches your value you attach to the card, because you're just like, oh, this card is attached to this particular moment, and I can talk about it with this person, and I can derive this social collective effervescence, or these stronger social bonds. But yeah, that's kind of the sense that I have, where it's like, it doesn't hit as hard when you're doing it online. Like, it's not the pure stuff. I don't know. It's cut with mediation, and we want the real thing, the pure stuff.
I think that is a good place to end, right? The separation between the online, not the real, but the online and the physical, right? Mm-hmm. The online and the physical, I guess we could call
the virtual and the physical. Yeah.
Virtual and the physical. Pat, thank you. Let's not have so much space between our next visit as we had with before the last one. So it was good.
Yeah. And I hope I didn't bore your listeners to death and take away all your subscriptions.
I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I think we're going to find out that Bowling Alone is going to be sold out of Amazon after this podcast.
There's plenty of copies, and if anybody wants to talk about the wonderful world of social capital and stuff, you can find me and DM me at Insta account Haver, underscores between Instant account and accountant Haver. So,
all right, Pat, thanks. Take care.
All right, bye, Dave.